as many people across the world will know, there have been numerous reports of China introducing camps or facilities in the west of China, in which the Uyghur Muslim minority in the country are being taken. And obviously there's a great deal of speculation around what these camps are about. The Western view is that these are somehow similar to concentration camps that we might have seen in the Second World War in Europe. The Chinese obviously counter that by saying that these are simply places of education and places people can go to, for example, learn Chinese and become more embedded in Chinese culture, mainstream Chinese culture. But there have been reports that the Chinese government is developing facial recognition software for the Uyghur Muslim population, and that this facial recognition software is being created by Huawei in particular. Huawei is obviously an interesting company anyway, because as we know, the Trump administration in the United States has been chasing down the company because of issues relating to 5G and suspected espionage. And we know that in Canada, for example, there's currently an ongoing case involving one of the senior leaders from Huawei. So Huawei is an interesting organization in general terms, but essentially what has happened is in response to specifically the issue around the facial recognition software being developed by Huawei, Antoine Griezmann, the French footballer who plays for Barcelona in Spain, he's had a personal endorsement deal with Huawei, and he has announced that he is terminating his relationship with Huawei as a consequence of these reports that they're involved in developing facial recognition software. So this clearly on the part of Griezmann is a bold move. Maybe it's a statement of his personal position on relations with China. Maybe it says something about the kind of standards and morals that he has as an individual. But I think it is a complicated issue. It's not straightforward, and I guess, you know, as we go through today, you'll ask me a little more about this. My view would be is that we are now we're living in an era where sport and politics, whether people like it or not, they are so intertwined with one another that we're living in days of really complicated decisions and controversial issues, and I think, you know, this year we've seen, for example, the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've also, just a year ago, we saw the issue of the NBA in China with the Daryl Morey tweet about Hong Kong that created a whole series of issues. We also had Mesut Ozil, the Arsenal player, similarly tweeting his support on social media for China's Uyghur community. And this is not just about sport and politics. It's obviously about money in business and industry too. And for that matter, diplomatic relations and soft power. And so hence, you know, we refer to this as geopolitical, or perhaps geopolitically economic, might be another way to put it. So as regards Griezmann himself, I think he is just another example of an athlete activist. And my use of the word "just" there is a little, probably a little unfair. What we're now beginning to see is a new generation of athlete activists who are prepared to stand up publicly and speak out about issues and causes and matters that are very dear to them. Obviously, we can think about Ozil and Griezmann in relation to China, but obviously we have athletes like Colin Kaepernick and Naomi Osaka in the United States around Black Lives Matter. In Britain, we have Marcus Rashford, who engaged in a very high profile and pretty successful campaign around free school meals for children. And this is very different. This is very different even to a year ago, but certainly to 5 or 10 years ago, when in the hyper commercialized world of sport that we were living in, for many athletes, it was kind of shut up, put up, don't cause any issues, don't cause any problems, because there will be economic consequences. And I think we are now living in a period of our history where the politics and one's personal moral stance is gaining parity with money, and it isn't just about money anymore. So I think what Griezmann has done alongside these other instances, it is important. It is important for sport. And as we move forward from here, I think for athletes, for teams, for governing bodies, for federations, for events, understanding and being able to respond to this trend is really crucial. You know, we recently saw the president of the IOC stand up and say, sport and politics don't mix. I'm sorry, that's just impossible. You know, in the current era, that's just impossible. And whilst you might use fine words to try and placate concerns, that sport is not about politics. Sport is about politics, and it's about money as well. So let's look at that in two ways. Let's look at it in terms of Griezmann, and then let's look at it in more generally. I think as far as Griezmann is concerned, we've got to ask what his motives were, and I'm sure that for many of us, you know, somewhat idealistically, we would hope that this is a moral stance, and these are genuinely held convictions, and I think to be able to publicly express your genuinely held convictions is a really important thing for all of us. And so in that sense, you know, I admire Griezmann for taking this stance. But what I found really interesting about him is that there have been a considerable number of issues around Huawei for quite a long time now. It's a hypersensitive company and brand. Issues around surveillance and ideology and, you know, conflict with the West. And I'm not going to make any judgment about that at this particular point in time, because I think it's a big issue. Why didn't Griezmann do it before now? You know, why did he choose this point? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Griezmann is known for his fortnight goal celebration. And his fortnight goal celebration is interesting because Fortnite is owned by Epic Games, and Epic Games is 40% owned by Tencent. Tencent is a Chinese company, and there have been numerous reports about the relationship between Tencent and the Chinese government. So whether Antoine Griezmann likes it or not, he's embedded in a network of business and politics in China and other factors and issues. I think the third thing is, and having investigated a little more, last year Barcelona was identified as being the most successful European football club on Chinese social media. Griezmann plays for Barcelona, and so now Griezmann is in conflict with his club, because his club clearly is committed to being successful in China commercially. And so what Griezmann has said, and we saw this with Ozil and Arsenal, Ozil fell into conflict with his club. And so I speculate, you know, was this a strategic move by Griezmann and his representatives to create this conflict, to kind of manufacture a move away from Barcelona? Obviously, we've got the transfer window opening very soon. So I think what Griezmann did as an individual is really interesting. I would like to think positively and think this is a really principled sports person who has adopted a particular stance and is prepared to stand up and represent that stance. but I think it's more complicated than that. As regards athletes more generally, and especially in China, as we saw with the Daryl Morey tweet last year. So Daryl Morey was the general manager of the Houston Rockets NBA franchise. He posted one tweet expressing support for protesters in Hong Kong. And that ultimately led to the NBA disappearing from television screens in China for a year. And so the economic and financial consequences for the NBA, and let's be clear about this, also for the United States, not just for the NBA, also for the United States, these were significant, they were substantial. And so there is a real tension now between an individual's opinions and the positions of those organizations that individuals work for. And that then in turn is set in the context of economic interest and political interest. And then obviously beyond that into the issue of international relations between countries and what their leaders are trying to do. And I guess ultimately what we're seeing is almost like the weaponization of sport. Sport is just another tool in the armory of conflict between countries. And I think certainly what conceivably Griezmann has done is not just to take a personal stance. He's in some respects he's a foot soldier in a much bigger battle that is now taking place.